Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Everyone just filtering into the session, so we're going to give everyone a few more seconds to join, and then we'll kick things off. Fantastic. Sophia, if you want to head over to the next slide, I'll go through our housekeeping notes real quick. Awesome. Again, everyone, thanks so much for joining us today for our session, Healthcare Talent Expectations for 2023 and How to Exceed Them. We're so happy to have you here today. My name is Sarah, and I'm a member of the marketing team here at Bullhorn. Before we begin, I just wanted to cover a few quick housekeeping items. First and foremost, today's webinar will definitely be recorded, and you'll be receiving a copy of the recording in your inbox within the next 24 hours. All attendees will be muted during today's presentation, but we do really strongly encourage you guys to ask questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We'll be getting to as many Q&A questions as we can before the end of the session after we cover all of the content. Also, we should wrap up in around 45 minutes. So let's go ahead and get things started. I'm going to pass it over to Sophia.
Thanks so much. So I'm Sophia Chang, Product Marketing Manager here at Bullhorn for the healthcare vertical, and I have with me Matt Lavoie, a Solutions Consulting Manager, and him and his team have worked with many healthcare staffing firms. And so today what we're going to be covering in our webinar is industry context, what we've heard from different providers in the healthcare space, as well as our solutions that can help you address those issues. So first, for the broader context around the talent landscape. And so every single year, we do our grid survey, asking different staffing firms what they're seeing and experiencing in the market. So we survey thousands of different staffing firms, and here what we're going to present today is what we're seeing in North America specific to healthcare staffing. And so what we've heard from SAA and also what we've heard from our different customers is that healthcare staffing has experienced an explosion in growth due to the pandemic. And you'll see here in 2022, the market reached $55.1 billion in revenue. And in 2023, it's projected to contract slightly, but still be very elevated compared to pre-pandemic levels of 2019. And so with that kind of growth, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of different challenges. First, what we heard from different healthcare staffing firms in our grid survey is that the number one challenge they're facing is the limited supply of providers. Right now, there's a 3 million nurse shortage in the United States, as well as a shortage of physicians. This was something that was happening before the pandemic and worsened during the pandemic. So providers right now, they're burned out and they're leaving the profession, or they're tired and they want a better work environment, better pay. And so because of this shortage, talent is in the driver's seat. We've also heard in our survey that a lot of healthcare staffing firms, they're really feeling that pricing pressure. So like I mentioned earlier, there's been historic growth, and now with bill rates starting to come down and things are starting to normalize, a lot of healthcare staffing firms are very conscientious around, how do I protect my profit margins? And then the third thing that was identified on our survey was the residual impact of the turnover surge, as well as elevated demand of COVID-19 on jobs and healthcare staffing. And in response to these challenges, what we heard in our survey is that healthcare staffing firms, they are looking to prioritize digital transformation, as well as improving the candidate experience and acquiring candidates. So those are the major focus areas for healthcare staffing firms, and it's different from other kinds of staffing firms in other verticals. And just to focus more on the talent piece, which is what we'll be focusing on for the remainder of the webinar, is that we have seen, according to SIA, that the average recruiting difficulty is 3.7 out of 5, and that's just grown over time. So in conjunction with also surveying staffing firms, we have also begun surveying talent to really understand their expectations. What does the current landscape look like for them in working with staffing agencies as well as on-demand staffing platforms, and really thinking about asking questions around, how do they think about each stage of the talent life cycle and working with staffing firms. So we surveyed over 2,000 temporary workers. This is something that we started last year and we'll be continuing to do. And the data that we're going to be presenting in this section is specific to North America healthcare, where we have around 250 or so healthcare professionals who have responded to the survey. But before we dive in, wanted to ground us in the different stages that we'll be talking about. So we have connected recruiting, which is a strategy that's built on more than just technology, right? It's about combining the power of technology with the right engagement strategies and industry best practices to ultimately transform the way that your team engage with providers as well as clients. So we'll have a resource that we'll share with you in the chat if you'd like to learn more about this. But really this methodology, it's about attracting the right kinds of candidates. So going from passive to actively applying. Engage is all about going from having applied all the way through accepting a job offer. Onboarding is about credentialing, getting them to that start date, making sure the first week is going really well. And then nurture is all about what is that experience like and working with you and the facility while on assignment. And really the goal here is driving additional referrals, and then especially in healthcare staffing where there's a limited talent pool, redeploying your best workers. And so before we go into each cycle, we're going to launch a poll and would love for you to respond.
Hey everyone, we have a real quick poll. One thing we'd love to hear from all of you is just what areas of provider drop-off really concern you and your business the most, or that you're struggling with. This gives us some more insight as we go through the rest of the session, and we can make sure we cover the things most important to your firm. Give people a couple of seconds to respond, and then I'll share the results with all of you. See, a few people haven't responded yet, so I'll give you one more second. You should all now be able to see the results.
Awesome. So this actually lines up too with where our candidates are experiencing the most pain in terms of onboarding and credentialing. So we'll make sure to touch on each of these different things throughout the webinar. Thank you. So we're going to talk about our Bullhorn Healthcare solution. So we have a solution that's going to able to help you scale your growth while also transforming your talent experience. And so we have 4 different pillars where this solution can help you in supporting your growth as well as your talent experience. So you're able to grow provider loyalty, offer that talent-centric experience in order to increase your redeployment. For your sales and recruiting teams, you're able to accelerate time to fill while increasing productivity and improving the client and provider relationship. For your credentialing specialists, you're able to drive compliance while also speeding up the credentialing process so that workers are cleared to start their job sooner. And then also maintain healthy cash flow and financial health by managing time and pay accurately. And so we're going to be diving deeper on the grow provider loyalty piece today. Matt, go ahead and talk about the this piece.
Perfect. Thanks, Sophia. So let's dig deeper on how you can use Bullhorn and the solutions to help grow that provider loyalty, really the heart of your success on a staffing firm. We're going to look at a talent-centric experience today, and we're going to really start as we look at that provider relationship life cycle. Sophia, if you could move to the next slide. What's interesting is when we look at the grid survey data, when we talk to customers, when we talk to various segments within healthcare, regardless of that segment, one thing that's consistently coming to the forefront is that provider experience. We've talked about the reasons for that with the talent shortage. But what I want to touch upon here, Sophia, is that connected recruiting methodology that you talked about, because regardless of what segment that is, it allows for our customers to have that flexibility for that provider experience and to optimize that throughout that relationship life cycle. What I'm really excited about today is, as you take over for the next slide, is looking at some of that survey data and sharing how the right tech stack, and we'll dive into some of that, can really impact that provider experience. Let's take a look at that data.
Thanks, Matt. So for that first stage of attracting, having people go from being passive to active and applying to that job, and how do you make sure that people aren't slipping through the cracks? So one of the top 3 reasons for why a candidate would choose to work with a healthcare staffing firm is access to jobs, reputation, and also positive past experiences in working with you. And there's a ton of opportunity in terms of making sure that you're reaching out to these different passive candidates. What we've heard is that in our survey, healthcare candidates, 73% of them want to be reached out to at least once a week with different opportunities. And really, it's all about how do you make sure that you have a less leaky funnel. So what we've heard is that 4 out of 5 healthcare workers, they abandon a promising opportunity because it took too long, and 25% of them abandoned the opportunity before even applying. So there's a lot of great things that you can do in order to make sure that you're not losing people at this stage. And I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
So let's talk about 3 of those pieces that you just mentioned, Sophia. First, timeliness. So knowing that the transition of turning a lead into a candidate often is about timeliness and responsiveness. So 2 things come into mind there. One is staffing firms can be in control with this methodology. They can certainly notify recruiters when it's appropriate time to reach out. But also the flip side of that is we can also enable that provider experience to allow for self-service for those that crave it. So at the end of the day, what this does is it bridges together a very easy experience of working together. So you talked about that past experience as being influential as to why a provider would work with a staffing firm. What we want to focus on here is we're creating that incredible experience that will ultimately turn into a reason why this provider would want to work with us. And then the third piece here that I think comes into mind is that access to jobs and the reputation that you talked about. Being able to identify and work with that provider at the right time provides our recruiters, our outreach personnel, to provide that provider with the right guidance when they're looking for career direction, job guidance. And ultimately, we're going to dive into, as we look at the next slide from a workflow, what some of those options are. There are 3 reasons why people would want to work with a staffing firm: access to jobs. So giving them the ability to do that. That reputation was the second piece. So how do we allow our providers to receive segmented content and allow that recruiter then to have more time to have meaningful activities that ultimately build that relationship, elevate that brand, and increase that reputation? All of this, as I alluded to on the last slide, is we're creating that new experience, the game-changing experience, and we'll get into some of the stats as to what that impact will be now that we have the right experience, what that might mean as we look at that life cycle from talent becoming an employee, and then the opportunities for redeployment as well as referrals.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And so what we've heard is, so for this next stage, engaging. So once you have someone apply, how do you make sure that they make it all the way through accepting that job offer and getting on assignment? So the way that you communicate and the channels that you leverage really matter according to our grid data. And so the top 3 preferred methods of communication is email, phone, and text. And during the job search, we found that a lot of people prefer email, but phone and text afterwards. And then even while on assignment, email is still the #1 channel, but they've actually preferred texting over calling at that point. The thing that matters most in this stage to healthcare professionals is actually finding them the right job. And that's the value that they see the most in terms of working with a recruiter at a healthcare staffing firm. And I also can't stress enough how important it is to make sure that you're engaging with them throughout this entire process, especially this piece. So 1 out of 3 say that their recruiter matched them with opportunities that were not a good fit. And also 1 out of 3 also said that their recruiter was not proactive about opportunities when one fell through. So I think there's a lot that you can be doing here in terms of increasing the conversions at this stage for engage. And I'm going to hand things off to Matt to go into what our solution can do.
So Sophia, you talked about managing the relationship. How does the recruiter manage that relationship with the provider, and the impact of, while managing that relationships, providing them with the right job opportunities? On the flip side, the recruiter is also managing a pipeline of opportunities that are coming in from various sources. So there's that balance there. So presenting the right opportunities to the provider really determines what is that right moment, and how do we perhaps engage in that. So as we look at the next slide and some of those options within the Bullhorn technology stack, 2 statistics that you talked about from the grid survey that you shared. One of those was 1/3 of providers were matched with jobs that they were not the right fit. So the question really is, how do we leverage the technology within our tech stack to impact those 1/3 of providers? And one of the things that we've consistently heard is, how do I leverage my own internal database? With this limited population of providers out there, the gold is more than likely in our internal database. So not only is it presenting with the right jobs, but getting that feedback, getting that individual DNA of that provider to be able to understand where they are in their career and where they want to go. Also providing that a mechanism for a recruiter to give the system feedback on that match. That's not only going to provide visibility and notifications when it's appropriate to meet that person at the right time, but also what happens on that second stat that you talked about, that 1 out of 3 providers say that recruiters were not proactive when an opportunity falls through. Well, the good news is we have a dashboard that many of our end user consumers utilize, and it has actionable insights on it. And one of those actionable insights is just that, not only what activities that I've been performing, but what activities have I not been performing that might impact the bottom line. So the nice thing about that is we can now take those opportunities, those 1 out of 3 that might have said people are not engaged, and really turn those into opportunities to increase our fill rate and stop any of that bleed to candidate fall off.
Awesome. And now we're going to move on to the next stage in terms of onboarding. So providers cite credentialing and pay as common and costly mistakes. And I know that a lot of you mentioned in our poll that this is actually the part where you see people drop off the most. And so what we've heard from our survey is that on your onboarding challenges for talent as well are the most reported problems. So the 2 most reported challenges throughout talent lifecycle is this specific stage, especially around credentialing. And what we've heard is that 1 out of 3 say they dealt with a time-consuming credentialing process in their most recent assignment. And it's incredibly important to also make sure that you're engaging with them throughout the application process, through this onboarding process, because workers who aren't paid on time or they're not prepared for an assignment, they are 2 times less likely to work with a firm again. So this is going to impact your redeployment rate as well as your retention rate, in terms of getting through this process if you don't go through it well.
Delays hurt all. And that's the simply stated, right? So we're going to look at ways where we can increase visibility, increase efficiency, and create a very easy to use process when it comes to onboarding and credentialing. Sophia, if you could move to the next slide. So you talked about cumbersome credentialing. You talked about time-consuming onboarding as being 2 of the really big challenges that providers face. Oftentimes the reasoning for this, and it's outlined here, it's a lack of a single source of truth, lack of visibility into who's ready to work and where they might be ready to work. And then the resulting is a manual time-consuming process. So if we can look at it from the perspective of providing a streamlined process, visibility throughout that process, whether it's a recruiter, it's a credentialer, it's a candidate or provider that has the ability to self-serve, that often ends up being a large part of the reason. As you mentioned, there in our survey, most had a very cumbersome process in their most recent experience. So if we can make that a much better experience for that provider, it's going to then impact that reason why a provider will want to work with a firm again. So as we're hitting that, we want to think about, okay, now that we've made that process easier and we've put a provider on assignment, Sophia, I want you to talk or dive into a little bit of the statistics around what it looks like during assignment.
Thanks, Matt. So this last stage, how do you make sure that you are continuing to nurture those relationships on assignment and getting them ready for future redeployment? So one key thing that we heard from our healthcare professionals in this survey is that staying in touch throughout the assignment is something that they really value. So 1 out of 3 healthcare professionals say that responsiveness declined once they were on assignment. And talents who say the recruiter didn't reach out on assignment are 3 times more likely to say they'll never work with that staffing firm again. And then in terms of redeployment and what talent is saying around their experience about that, 67% of healthcare professionals say their recruiter didn't reach out about future opportunities before end of their assignment date, including 45% of them who actively want to work with their staffing firm again. So I think there's this mismatch of, the recruiter reaching out to healthcare professionals while they're working with them, and the talent actually saying yeah, I actually want that, but that's not happening. I'm going to pass things back to Matt.
Sophia, we're talking about the 3 R's in recruiting, and those are retention, redeployment, and referrals. And what's the impact of those? I was talking with a client the other day, and they said it very simply, that the firm who figures out how to own the relationship with the provider will win. So what does that look like as we think about 2 of those R's? As you can move to the next slide, Sophia, let's talk about retention and referrals. So you shared a stat with us that a provider is 3 times more likely not to work with a recruiter if there is no contact after an assignment begins. We also know from a prior grid survey that we reached out to providers that 3 out of 5 or 60% of providers want to be contacted on a weekly basis while on assignment. So as we think about that retention and the referrals, having that mechanism again to provide that content, to be able to engage that provider, but also give a self-service capability for them to schedule time with a recruiter or someone who owns that relationship is paramount when we move to the next slide, when we talk about redeployment. So 2/3 of providers indicated they did not hear about opportunities before their current assignment ended. And what's interesting about that is 45% of those providers said they wanted to work with that firm again. So the question that I often have with customers as we talk about this is redeployment, and how is that measured today within the firm? Are we looking at redeployment as an opportunity for growth? Are we looking at redeployment as not only an opportunity to maintain that current book of business, but when we think about that limited provider that provider pool out there, that redeployment is oftentimes the area that not only can we maintain that revenue, but we can find opportunities for referrals to network within that provider that's happy. And as we see their experience trend upward in terms of a better experience with that firm or with that recruiter, the odds of them working with that consistent firm in a competitive landscape go up. So Sophia, I'm going to turn it back to you to take us home.
Thanks. So we have a complete solution where you're able to deliver an incredible talent experience, from getting candidates or talent to be leads to candidates, and then actually becoming employees and becoming your best employees that you can leverage again and again in order to increase retention, referrals, and redeployment, making the most of your talent in a very limited talent pool. And so now we'd like to open it up to different questions that you may have, and Matt and myself can answer any of them.
Awesome. Someone asked what omni-channel communication is. Can one of you expand on that a little bit?
Sure, I can take it, Sophie, and if you want to add anything to it. So we think about omni-channel communication. There's a few misnomers out there. You'll hear the term multi-channel versus omni-channel. I view omni-channel communication as the ability to speak with somebody, the ability to email, the ability to text somebody, but not simultaneously. So a good example I'll share with people is if my kid's school, for example, gets closed because of a snow day, I typically get a phone call, a text, and an email all at the same time. That is questionable in terms of what that experience might look like for a provider. So if you know that that provider prefers to be texted, or it's more effective to email or notify a recruiter to pick up that phone, when we think about omni-channel, it's taking all of those modes of communication and identifying the right moment and when to apply that point of communication.
Yeah, and I think also the difference between omni-channel versus like multi-channel is that all of those work together on the back end.
Awesome. Thanks, both of you. I saw another question come through just asking about the talent survey and that we're using to reference and pulling all this data from. I'm going to throw the link for that just in the chat if any of you have any interest in reading further into our grid talent survey.
I see a question. Do you have a credentialing solution? Matt, would you like to take that?
We certainly do have a credentialing solution, and real excited to talk to you about it. And it's on two sides of that. It's one is the provider experience, and on the flip side, it's the internal staffing firm experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question just about increasing conversations with engagement. Can you speak a little bit more just to how the solution helps to further engage candidates and how it supports recruiters to have more in-depth conversations and regular communication?
So our favorite stat with leveraging a solution that has all of the pillars to be able to provide that omni-channel communication is when customers will come back and say that, you know what, I can be rest assured that nobody slips through the cracks, that there's not one person in my database that does not get some form of communication, because we now have the power to segment that data out. We have the ability to create effective campaigns, and we have the ability to measure the effectiveness of that. So you think about the growth and the ability and the opportunity that a healthcare staffing firm would have within their own database, that provides them with that really great experience, which we talked about in one of the stats. One of the reasons why a provider would work with a healthcare firm is that brand and reputation.
Great, thank you, Matt. One more question came through about the Bullhorn Marketplace. Does the Bullhorn Marketplace offer a function that will allow candidates to see or use an app and have more visibility into the onboarding process?
So I would say that we have a solution right within our Bullhorn Talent platform that allows for a candidate to see visibility throughout that. And the beauty of that is it is a central place, not only where they can log in and see that visibility throughout, but as we talked about the other elements of connected recruiting today, engaging somebody during their initial application, but nurturing them while on assignment. It's often the same place where they might enter time, where they might receive notifications of opportunities for redeployment, where we might be asking for referrals, and they might be connecting or scheduling time directly with their recruiter. So absolutely, we have a place where people can see the status of their onboarding, but it's often a place where they can do much more throughout that connected recruiting methodology.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. Another resource I just wanted to drop in the chat real quick is we have been referencing the connected recruiting workflow and process throughout this entire webinar. So I'm just going to drop in our guide to connected recruiting in the chat if there's anything else you want to learn more about with connected recruiting. Any other questions that anyone has, feel free to drop them in the chat. We still have a few minutes left where we can answer those. Someone asked, do we have any data on either non-clinicians or candidates looking for full-time employment? Is that something either of you know off the top of your head?
Related to healthcare staffing? No, not at this time. This is something that we definitely targeted more temporary contractor workers. And then we do have overall our grid survey data that's also not healthcare specific, that's on our website.
For those interested in our grid trends report for all of 2023, which actually just launched earlier this week, I am putting that also in the chat right now. A lot of resources for you guys. Hey, Matt, another question just came through about our credentialing solution. Would you be able to just dive a little bit more into what our credentialing solution looks like, both on the candidate side and on the recruiter side?
Sure. So typically what we see on the candidate side is when we talk about that omni-channel communication is oftentimes the outreach happening via omni-channel. So it's whether it's inviting them via text, via email, or even a place that is self-service for some candidates today. What that also means is it provides them with the ability to access it, whether it's through a mobile device, an iPhone, a smartphone, a computer, a tablet. So really providing a really easy to use experience. On the flip side, what we see on the recruiter side is visibility right from within not only that provider's record, but dashboard visibility if there's a relationship between the credentialing and a job that they've applied for or an assignment that is pending start. So what's nice about that is now that information is encompassed in one, visible not only to the provider but to the recruiter, We often see opportunity here to leverage some notifications both internally. Let's notify the recruiter when something might be slipping or falling, and they might need to have that outreach, but also let's notify the provider when there's opportunity to help get the process moving. The other piece that comes into play are any of the credentials or things that might be done outside of that direct engagement, background checks, drug screens, that visibility. Bullhorn has the capability right within that to bring that central source of truth and visibility. So what that means for a recruiter at the end of the day is real-time visibility, not only into who's pending and waiting to start, but thinking about all that process that happens there. That information now can easily be matched to new opportunities to redeploy that provider, or to opportunities that might just exist, that you have providers that are not out on assignment today that are in your database today that can be leveraged. And we can start to drip campaign some opportunities that might put those people to work really quickly, and we really reduce that time to onboard and credential. As you can see, I get excited as I talk about credentialing and onboarding, so it's exciting on both sides of the solution.
I think also on top of that, we have automated credential expiration alerts. So as if you have a nurse on assignment where their credential is going to expire, this is a way to make sure that they can remain compliant while on the job. Or if you're getting ready to redeploy them, it can help shorten the onboarding credentialing process by them already having that information with you.
Great. Thank you both so much for all those answers. I think we've gotten through most of the questions we have here. If we have any, I think we're wrapping up and kind of hitting the end of our session. If there are any questions we didn't get to during this, we'll have one of us reach out to you directly so we can chat a little bit more about that. And if any of you are looking to explore these solutions further or have any questions, you can reach out to us directly or reach out to your account manager. Thank you all so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.